Just a couple of sporting updates, 10 minutes into the third quarter, and the Swans are 57 and the Melbourne side are 23. And the news is not much better over there in the second test. Australia are 4 for 71. Smith and Wade are at the crease and they're chasing 258. So let's hope things improve there for the Aussies. Okay, if I can have your attention, thank you so much. And I know you'll give this special person all the time afforded to her, because it's a great privilege tonight to introduce our special guest. Susan Alberti AC has faced great challenges in her life, personal tragedy and illness, but through it all, Susan has been a wonderful beacon of light for so many in her undying wish to make things better for others, chairing her own Diabetes Research Foundation and so many others. And Susan has been a trailblazer for women's football, creating the highly successful AFLW. She's driven by her enormous passion for the Bulldogs. She has served on the board as a member and vice president for so many years, and she's had an autobiography written called The Footy Lady. Her coveted awards are endless, including Melburnian of the Year 2017, Victorian of the Year 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please make welcome a great Australian, Susan Alberti.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. Buonasera a tutti. To special guests this evening, particularly the Most Reverend Peter Comensoli, the Archbishop of Melbourne, who I'm sitting on my table, Mr. Colin Miranda, Chairman of the Priests Support and Education Fund, State Chairman of the Knights of the Southern Cross Victoria, Mrs. Lynette Miranda, the Very Reverend Dennis Stanley, Rector of Corpus Christi College, Justice Richard Tracy, Mr. Colin Walsh, International Chair of the Order of Knights, Ms. Sharon Walsh, ladies and gentlemen. Well, what an honour it is to be here tonight, to be able to speak to all of you. I feel very, very honoured. When I was asked to speak here tonight, I couldn't think of a better organisation to want to speak to. So could I begin, first of all, by acknowledging the traditional owners of country in our state and their continuing connection to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures, and to the elders, both past, present and emerging. I am very pleased to be here tonight and congratulate all the attendees for the support you are giving to this important initiative. As a former Siena convent, now college girl, I, like many of you, have shared Catholic experiences certainly with many of you in this room. My Catholic education instilled in me a lifelong focus on helping those less fortunate than myself, and I still practice that to this day. I'm going to touch on my life experiences and just explain to you how I've faced the challenges I've encountered along the way, and I hope I can give some inspiration for everything that you face in your local parishes, workplaces, your households, and everything that you confront with every day of the year. But let me start from the very beginning of my own life. I'm an Australian girl, born in Bairnsdale to two Australian parents. My father came out of the war. He'd been serving in the war, and then he joined the police force. And the year he joined the police force was the year I was born, a long time ago. Dad had very little money. In fact, he had just enough for a deposit on a housing commission home in Melbourne. And Dad was transferred to Melbourne, and that's where we went to, in Ashwood in Victoria. Dad put the deposit on the home, and that's where I lived, and that's where I grew up, and that's where I stayed until the day I was married, when I married Angelo. But my father was a very good man. He constantly made me aware of the needs of others, certainly by my teachers, particularly those teachers at St Michael's Church, at St Michael's Catholic School in Ashburton. I was taught by presentation nuns, and yes, I used to ring the bell. That was my job. I thought I was very important to be able to ring the bell because we didn't have anything electronic then, and I was always on time because if I wasn't, I wouldn't be able to get my bus anyhow to get to school, and I was certainly on a bus at 6 years of age going to school. But those nuns had a profound effect on me, and then soon after I attended Siena Convent, as it was known in those days. 129 students when I attended Siena, again taught by Dominican nuns. I believe they've got about 800 students there now, Again, those nuns, those wonderful, wonderful Dominican nuns, had a profound effect on me. And I am the person I am today because of what the values that they instilled in me along with my parents. There is still one nun who taught me. She taught me music. God, poor woman. I was supposed to practice, and boy did I get into trouble when I didn't. That was the only thing we could afford, was a piano at home, because Dad was a trained opera singer. And she's still alive. She's nearly 100. She doesn't recognise me now because she's suffering with dementia. But every time I hear about her, I want to know what she's doing. And she was such a special lady in my life and turned me into the person that I am today. I remember in about grade 2 being spoken to by my teachers, in about year 2 I think it was, and certainly my brother as well, who instilled in me that there were people in other parts of the world far worse off than me, such as the Solomon Island missions and of course St Vincent de Paul. But I used to wonder, how could they be worse off than me? I had nothing. I had no money. I had no... I didn't have anything. I had just a roof over my head. I had 2 good parents and I was being given a Catholic education. And many of the kids in my class did have money, but I thought, how can I make a difference? So I used to walk my bus fare. It was a long walk up a hill, and I would put my money in the mission boxes. And that was my way of making a contribution, my simple way. I guess you could say I've been doing it ever since. But that to me was very important, that I could give back, but I often wondered what I could give back because I had nothing to give, just myself. And to be kind to the person sitting next to me and to care about the person sitting next to me. My own dear old dad, who was a policeman, he worked voluntarily for St Vincent de Paul for nearly 60 years, in fact right up until he died. And I can't recall a Christmas day or Christmas morning when my father was at home with us. He was out feeding the needy and the hungry with his meagre salary, and then he'd rush home and have lunch with his family. That was my father. That's what I grew up with as a child, and that was the example that both my mother and father set for me. So in those early days instilled in me a sense of a fair go and never giving up. My education and my family life set me on the path of where I am today. Yes, I'm passionate about 3 things in life: advancing the cause of women in sport and business, finding a cure for type 1 diabetes, and of course the AFL Western Bulldogs. Let me remind you, we won the grand final in 2016, if you've forgotten. Thank you. And the same year I was president of Footscray, the Seconds. My first year as president, we won the grand final. That's girl power. But wait for it. The girls of the Western Bulldogs won theirs too. So we had our 3-peat in 2016. So if you barrack for Hawthorn, eat your heart out. So you'll understand how I use leadership to deliver on these topics, and more by the time I've stepped down this evening. Yes, whilst I'm a proud graduate of the Catholic education system, I also have a degree from the School of Hard Knocks, as arguably the first female registered builder in Victoria. I met a migrant. My husband came to Australia at the age of 19 with nothing. No money, no home, no family, no language. But he had a dream and a vision. I did too. I think I was an entrepreneur at the age of 6. I was selling cakes to make some money to give back to my parents, although Mum did a lot of the cooking, but I did a lot of the selling and a lot of the eating. But I felt I was helping my family, but I was an entrepreneur. I always wanted to be better. Not that my parents weren't good people, but I knew if I worked hard I could be successful. So was Angelo. Angelino was his real name. He came from Udine, northern Italy. He was blonde, blue-eyed and very handsome. Not bad, actually, on the eye. And I wasn't bad either, the 2 of us, but we made a formidable team. We both had dreams and vision. But when he arrived in Australia, as he was coming down the gangplank at Port Melbourne, at age of 19, with no money, no family, no home, nothing, he had an appendicitis attack and was rushed to the Alfred Hospital. That was his introduction to Australia. Welcome to Australia, Angelo. Not long after that, he met me. And of course, life changed when he met me. Angelo had to learn English because to survive he needed to learn English. Within a few years, he was already a leader of men. He was already in charge. But whilst Angelo was learning English, I thought if it's good enough for him to learn English, it was good enough for me to learn Italian. And by the time his mother arrived in Australia, who I absolutely adored, Luigia, and his family, I could speak Italian, cook Italian, understood the Italian way, which made it much easier with my mother-in-law. She loved me and I loved her. That's one way to get sweet with your mother-in-law, to learn her language and cook her food. Because you know what the Italian boys are like, they're really spoilt by their mother. So, but we were married in '67. Not long after we were married, Angelo came to me and said, I want to become a naturalised Australian. I said to him, you're absolutely certain? He said, yes, I'm here now, I'm paying taxes, I want to become an Australian. I said, but you're going to be giving up your home. He said, no, I'll never give up my home. I'll always love where I came from. It was a little town called Vivaro in Udine, near Spilimbergo. There were 500 people. And he said, I'll never forget where I came from. I love Italy, and I do too. He said, but I want to be an Aussie. So he became naturalised. And about a month after that, Angelo was out working, as he was, working 7 days a week, like a lot of Italian migrants at that time in the 50s and 60s. A stick went through his eye when he was boxing up some concrete. As a consequence of that, he lost his eye, but after about 12 operations, they had to remove his eye. And also because of the medication he was taking for his eye, it impacted on his kidneys and he had to have his kidney removed. So all of a sudden, I was thrust into a leadership role at a very, very early age, very young. I was not trained to be a CEO of a large building company, but I had to because Angelo was in and out of hospital, and I had to learn very quickly how I was going to manage things. So that was certainly a very difficult time for me, and I had to get my licence and all sorts of things to be able to compete with the big boys. And I was in the building industry for 45 years as the only woman. It was very difficult working with the unions because they could be pretty mean to me. But the thing is, they found it very hard to tell a woman to get stuffed because they'd never done it before, because they're only used to dealing with men. But I never succumbed to graft or corruption. I remained true to myself, and if I ever had to do that, I would have given up working, but I would never do that, and neither would Angelo. But then not long after that, following all of that, Angelo had another nasty accident. By this time we had estates and we were quite a large company. We were doing a lot of work. And as he went over to check on a leaking roof, it was, I'll use square feet, but it was a 200,000 square foot building. The plumber couldn't work out what the problem was, but he went over there because when you train in Italian technical school, you learn all trades. And Angelo was just a genius at fixing things and working out what the problem was. He was going down our estate and a drug-affected driver went straight through the intersection. He was on his motorbike. It was a beautiful sunny day. As you know, Italians love motorbikes. He had a number of motorbikes and it went straight through him and left him on the side of the road to die. That man left the scene of the accident, left Angelo to die. I knew I had to find that man, that perpetrator, and bring him back to justice. That's another story for another day, if you call it justice. Dad was still a policeman at that time and I was able to get help through Dad and a private investigator to bring the man back, to find out after the court proceedings the man had a list as long as your arm of something similar, but of course that couldn't be brought up in court at the time. So Angelo lasted 3 weeks in intensive care and I had to make a decision to turn off his life support, a very difficult decision. I took a lot of advice from a lot of incredible people, doctors, researchers, you name it. I talked to all of them. I wanted to give him the best opportunity. He was a brilliant man. We had, but then he died and I had to let him go, and my daughter was with me at the time, and that absolutely impacted on my daughter. It broke her heart, absolutely broke her heart. I wanted to have 4 children. I couldn't have children. It was very unfortunate. That was my dream. I had 3 wishes, and one of them was that, to have a big family, but it just was not to be. So when all this happened with Angelo and we had so much work on, we had about 8 buildings on the go, large buildings, blue chip companies, under contract, and if anyone knows what a contract means, it means you can go to the wall very easily if you don't complete those contracts. So I had some very difficult decisions to make at that time in the midst of a period of grief, shock and mourning. I had to make a decision about our large company, a business that at the time was employing about 300 people. We had 3 other businesses as well with another 100 people. And as you know, the Italian way, you look after your staff like family. And I know that's what Angelo would have done if it had happened to me. And I made sure that by the time I did wind down the business after about 10 years, that each and every one of those people had a job to go to. But I was not a registered builder at that time, which meant I had to make up my mind very quickly what I was going to do. as we're involved in a number of complex projects. So what did I do? I went back to school, went back to TAFE to seek the qualifications I needed to keep the show on the road. I remember walking into that class and walking down to the front of the class. I was the only woman in the class. I had a lot to learn very quickly. There was a lot of pressure on me. But what I discovered, most of those men in that class were migrants, a lot of them Italian, who couldn't speak English. Not realising that all those years ago that I'd learnt Italian, how beneficial it would have been for them. I was very good on paperwork. I was always the girl in the back office, handling all the finances. We often put up buildings without any finance. Angelo was like being on a merry-go-round with him, but we'd get the building up and we didn't have the finance, so I was always looking for the finance. So I was able to help those men, those brilliant men, with their paperwork. But in the workshop, they were the most remarkable, remarkable men I have ever met. They embraced me, they helped me, they encouraged me when I wanted to stop, and I came out of there with my qualifications through those brilliant men. But also, just go back a stage too. When Angelo died, I had no one to turn to. I was on my own. I was a young woman. So I joined a CEO syndicate, and they were all men. I used to meet every Monday in the city, and those men, again from different walks, different industries, again embraced me and helped me and encouraged me to be a leader. And to them too, I say to them to this day, thank you to all those men in the CEO syndicate and also the men in the workshop. And to this day, I employ some of those men. I'm still friends with them, and they're the most remarkable men I think I've ever met. So I came out with my qualifications, and arguably I was the first woman in Victoria. Couldn't have done it without them. So I was working extremely hard at that point in time, about 16 hours a day, most days of the week, to keep the show on the road and to keep my employees in a job. And of course, these were in different times, with different community expectations. No superannuation, no paid maternity leave, and workplace standards were not what they are today. I'm very proud of what I was able to achieve in memory of the migrant who came to this country at the age of 19. And of course, and then under my own stewardship, we delivered some great projects for this great state and Victoria. But apart from building construction, many of you would know about my passion concerning type 1 diabetes. Now, there's two different types of diabetes, not to be confused. Type 1 is usually happens to a child. Once it's diagnosed, it's for life and it never goes away. And insulin will only keep them alive. There's no cure. Type 2 is very different. It can be managed with medication, diet and exercise. We have 1.7 million people in this country with type 2. About 150,000 with type 1. Now remember, that's through no fault of their own. We have nearly 1 million people undiagnosed with type 2 diabetes. This is Australia. This should not be happening. The incidence of diabetes is growing in our community, indeed right around the world at a rapid rate. I'm sure there's probably someone here tonight who is either been personally impacted by the disease or have a family member or loved one with the disease. Whilst we know the reasons, some of the lifestyle and genetic reasons as to why a person develops type 2 diabetes, type 1 continues to be a major area of intrigue for medical researchers, although diagnosis and treatment has improved remarkably in recent years. So finding a cure for me for type 1 is a challenge I took on nearly 40 years ago. My only child, who was born in 1969, was tragically diagnosed with type 1 at the age of 12 in 1981. I gave birth to a beautiful little girl. She was the joy of my life and my husband. We were so happy. I thought this was the start of more children. I wanted to have children by the time I was 30, not to be. Perfectly healthy little girl. 20 years after Danielle was diagnosed with diabetes, she was in America. She'd attended Sacre-Cœur. She was a very good student. She then Melbourne University. And when her father died, her heart was breaking. She needed to go away and find her own identity. So she went on a scholarship. She didn't tell me. She applied for one. It would have been so much easier for me to write her a cheque, not my daughter. I taught her the value of hard work, being a caring person, and doing it on her own and knowing the value of a dollar. So she applied for a scholarship in Philadelphia at the Temple University and completed a master's degree. But whilst she was there, she was losing her eyesight because of diabetes, and then her kidneys were failing. And when she was there, she had to go and see doctors, and they said she needed a kidney. So two of her colleagues from university stepped up, two complete strangers. They were not compatible. I received a phone call from the specialist, told me to go to Mount Sinai to do the test. I was compatible. and I was then given the green light to bring my daughter home to give her my kidney. I would never have embarked upon a journey with my child if I thought I was going to put her in any sort of jeopardy. I was given the green light by all the doctors. It was all organised here in Melbourne at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. They'd meet me at the airport, and then it'll all be happening. Danielle and I embarked upon a trip from New York to Los Angeles. She wasn't too good on the plane. From New York to Los Angeles, she collapsed in the Qantas lounge, and she said to me, "Mum, I can't go on. I can't make it." I said, "Yes, you can. There's a new life waiting for you." I wanted her to get on that plane so I could give her my kidney. When we were on the plane a couple of hours, Danielle really was not well. She was thrashing around. She was in incredible pain. And she said to me, "Mum, can you rub my back?" I said, "Of course." And as I was rubbing her back, she said, "Mum, will you hold me?" Now remember, I held my daughter when she was born, the joy of my life. And as I held my daughter, she died of a massive heart attack in my arms. That's the beautiful girl that I gave birth to. But Danielle never told me she was so sick. She was really dying, my daughter, but she didn't want to bother her mother. She didn't want to worry me any more than was necessary. That was my caring, beautiful child who cared more about her mother than she cared about herself. So I was so proud of my daughter. But as she lay there on the seat next to me, I made a promise to her that I would never, ever, ever give up whilst there's still breath in me and whilst I still have the resources and the energy to be able to help medical research. Danielle died at the age of 32. She would be 50 if she was alive this year. But back to the beginning, faced with the unknown, when we were first told that Danielle was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, my immediate parental reaction was to seek medical advice and assistance with the natural expectation there simply be a quite readily accessible solution available. I was quite surprised and ill-prepared to discover that juvenile onset diabetes, now known as type 1, then represented one of the major unknowns of medical science, and to a great extent it still does today. More importantly, I learned that its incidence was increasing at a rapid rate each year, and that it is a demanding health issue that faces significant pressure on all family members. So this personal experience set me on a quest to raise public awareness and information and education about type 1. I'm very proud to say I gave my threepence to the mission boxes when I was a child at the age of 6. I'm very proud to say that over my journey of supporting medical research, I've given or raised and given in excess of $200 million, which has gone to medical research in this country to help my fellow Australians, something I'm very proud of. So Danielle had quite exceptional artistic talents, and she achieved significant success until her life was prematurely ended at 32. So her death more than nearly 20 years ago now has only increased my determination. But it's pleasing to note that diabetes, both type 1 and type 2, the more common form, has received increased publicity in Australia in recent years, and it now allows us to share in our stories with one another and look at new ways of living with this insidious disease. So my own personal experience served to increase my determination to contribute my time, my networking skills in the community and my personal resources. I've been reasonably successful, and I see it as very important. I see it my duty and responsibility to give back. I've been fortunate. Australia's been good to me, and I want to be good to Australia and give back. So I'm hoping I can create a better outcome for people with all diseases. So as I said, this has involved me in supporting many organisations. I chaired St Vincent's Institute for 14 years, something I enjoyed, and I've done many other things, but I've been able to give back, which is very satisfying. But when my husband died, I was very sick, I was very unwell, very unhealthy, and I was diagnosed with cancer 9 months after he died. And I remember going and seeing the specialist and being told I had cancer. I went on a journey that I don't ever want to go on again with operation, chemotherapy and radiation. I went into remission after 5 years, but not long after that I was sent to have an echocardiograph because I'd had very strong radiation across my chest and they wanted to make sure my heart was okay. And I went and had that test, and on the machine I had a heart attack. And I wanted to call an ambulance, and I said, no, I'm going to drive myself. I got a testadura, as they say, and I said, no, as I say, I'm glad Vic Pole aren't here tonight because they would have put me off the road if they had known I was driving. So I turned up at the Royal Melbourne, taken into emergency, then taken into surgery, come out the other side with 5 blockages and open heart surgery. My kidneys failed. I was in intensive care for quite some time. And my beautiful husband is here tonight with me, who I married 15 years ago, who's just stood by me. I told him when I had cancer he could leave. I could look after myself now. I wouldn't have got through that if it wasn't for Colin standing there with me and supporting me every step of the way, because he knew I was very sick and he knew I was in intensive care when my kidneys failed. I had seen what had happened to my daughter. Dialysis is what I was going on, and that's like a living death, and I saw my daughter on that. So when I was in intensive care and also when I was going through cancer, I realised I wasn't the leader that I thought I was. And if I could say one thing to all of you here tonight, you're all leaders. If you don't have good health, you can't do anything. You can't perform all the things that you want to do. I thought I was performing at my peak. No, I wasn't. I thought I was a leader. No, I wasn't. I was morbidly obese, I was unhappy, and I was very, very unhealthy. And when I had cancer, I thought, I'm going to change my life. I didn't do it. It took me having a heart attack in intensive care and lying there in intensive care in hospital for such a long time. It made me reevaluate what life was all about. I had to change my life. And after my kidneys failed, I realised that was it. So I went to see my kidney specialist. I had 4 specialists. One was a female. She was my kidney specialist. She gave me the answer that I was asking. Tell me the truth. I don't want you to, dance around me. She said, Sue, 1 or 2 things. You'll be dead in 6 months, and or you'll have a heart attack and you'll be on dialysis. So on the 4th of June 2014, I went home, bawled my eyes out, felt very sorry for myself. I shouldn't have, because I was a hypocrite. As my daughter said to me, Mum, you're a walking hypocrite. What are you going to do about yourself? It hurt, but it was true. It took a doctor telling me I was going to die. So on that date, I decided to change my life. In that time I was nearly 120 kilos at that time. I'm now 65 kilos. I've never been happier, I've never been healthier, and I think I'm a better leader than I've ever been. And now I'm able to do the things that I've always wanted to do, to make a difference and do good things and make a difference in the community that I live in. So it took me to make a lot of lifestyle changes, giving me a new lease of life. And as I say to my fellow Australians, prevention is far better than a cure. But of course, spending a considerable amount of time in hospital, as well as decades of engagement with the diabetes community, and more broadly now other scientific community, it reinforces my belief that we must focus on the individual, not just the lab coats and research projects. Health and well-being, especially mental health, is much more than just looking at statistics, trends, cost-benefit analysis and the like, and those important indicators that don't measure human frailty. We need to remember that behind every diagnosis or illness is a distraught sufferer grappling with the concept of living with a chronic disease for the rest of their life, and quite often concerned parents who are frightened at the prospect of micromanaging their child's sugar levels and the like. When Danielle passed away, I promised myself that I would work night and day as the ultimate volunteer to find better ways to treat, prevent, and hopefully one day before I die, to find a cure for type 1 diabetes. I mentioned all that money that's gone into medical research. I want to see a return on my money whilst I'm alive, not leave that to my trustee or my executor. I want a return, and I want to see it make a difference whilst I'm alive. Danielle was my only child, my only daughter. I'd now lost her, my mother, my father, my beautiful mother-in-law, my husband, and my grief was immense. But I internalised a lot of it, and I relied on my faith and put much of my energy into working hard through working and volunteering with organisations and participating in organisations that really make a difference. But now I'd like to give you some insight into my involvement in helping establish a league of their own, the AFL's Elite Women's Competition. This was a long-term dream of mine, to create an elite women's league, which I was told constantly it was all too hard, we didn't get the corporate support needed to sustain the competition, and even the girls weren't good enough to feature on primetime TV. Well, as I say, didn't we prove them all wrong? My own personal journey started, I don't even like to tell you, decades ago, when as a young girl my brother and I would go to the Western Whitton Oval to cheer on the red, white and blue every second Saturday. I dreamt of running out on that oval wearing the red, white and blue. I was a good footballer, and I'm modest too, aren't I? My father was an umpire, a very good umpire. He thought he knew the rules, but I knew them better. But he was a policeman, they know everything. And my brother was an umpire. Try running backwards, it's not easy. So I went on to play footy, and Richard did too, but Richie became an umpire and my dad was an umpire. So I always wanted to play the game. So I joined the cheer squad footy team because I was in the cheer squad. It was a safe environment because my father said so. He knew what he was talking about. Until one particular day, it was boring and the dogs were being beaten again. So I went up in the grandstand and found us some floggers and thought I'd see if they burnt. Now, remember, sometimes my dad would drop me off in a police car. It was pretty cool because the kids were scared of me. But this particular day was not funny. They did burn, and I nearly set the grandstand on fire. I've never played with matches ever since. But that particular day, I said to my brother, don't you dare tell Dad, don't you dob. And of course, my brother dobbed on me. When I did get in the police car that day, the kids really thought I was under arrest. And even more so, I was grounded for 3 months. When my father came down, you know, I was in trouble. In 3 months, I couldn't go to the football. He knew how to make me pay for what I'd done. So I wanted to play footy, but I was getting knocked around by the boys, 15-year-olds, who was like men, but I gave as good as I got. And many of you may know this story, but I'll repeat it again for those who haven't. I was going to a board meeting at the Whitton Oval not that long ago. The lady stopped me in the corridor and she said, I remember you. I thought, oh, I don't know who you are, and I was running. I never want to be late to a board meeting. I remember you, she said. Now, my father was a policeman. I said to Dad, what do you do when you're in a situation where you need support and help? I sit on them. I said, Dad, I can't sit on the players. He said, I'll teach you a policeman's tackle. That's what he called it. Well, I was probably as good a tackler as Tony Liberatore was, except I didn't gouge eyes, okay? So I could tackle. I couldn't run as fast as some of the kids, but I was strong and I could tackle. I remember you, she said, you tackled me so hard you broke both my arms. The last time I saw her, she was in the back of an ambulance. Now, I don't want to see her again. I hope I never see her, but she looked well. She's in her 70s and I don't think she holds it against me. So that was the policeman's tackle. So I was told at 15 I had to give up playing football. I could not believe it, why I was told to give up football. I was told to go home and take up crocheting and knitting. Well, I did that as well. My grandmother taught me that. But also I played footy in the backyard with my brother. People say they can't afford clubs to go and play. Well, we couldn't afford a club. I'd kick in the backyard and kick down in the park because the ball was always going over the fence and the neighbours got sick of me. So I loved football. My father said I'd eat a football, but I always wanted to play at an elite level. So it never left me. I said, one day, I'm a great dreamer. I used to always have a 5-year plan of what I was going to do and tick off the boxes. That was something I never, ever wanted to forget. 15, what could I do at 15? So that's why many years ago I decided to financially support the women in the early days. Now, for those of you who don't know, women's football started back officially, even though we're back further, in 1913, when the men went to war and the women slotted into their positions. So I say to the men out there, we need you as much as you need us. You've got a head start on us, 150 years. We love the game just like you do. We're trying to get it right. We're only 3 years into our major league at the moment. So we need you. Work with us. We need you as much as you need us. So I decided to financially support women's football. When I was alerted to the appalling facilities, a lack of resources our women had to contend with. I have seen facilities you wouldn't let your dog go in. I've been to places where there have been shipping containers with 2 urinals and 1 toilet for 22 women. That's not on. Absolutely not on for our women. They should not have to put up with that. I'm not asking for gold-plated taps. I'm just asking for hot and cold water and to be given the same opportunities as their male counterparts. So when I became involved with the league, we were on the verge of collapse, with no money, no moral on-ground support from the Australian Football League or other football organisations. I could not understand why a sport which was played and loved by so many women didn't get the support it deserved. But with the birth of the AFLW, we've gone from an underfunded suburban league with a few loyal spectators, some great athletes and a spirit of having a go, to a nationally televised competition with full venues, outstanding corporate support, a great television ratings. And yes, I was at the grand final this year in Adelaide. 53,000 people turned up. I was sitting next to Nicole Livingston and she said, Sue, if I don't open up, I'll have to open up another grandstand. I said, if you don't, you'll have a riot on your hands. That was history. There've never been that many people at a women's sporting event in this country. 53,000 people. I remember the first grand final up there on the Gold Coast. I was the ambassador to present the cup. This is a story I love to tell because it'll stay with me for the rest of my life. I remember taking out the cup, the Premiership Cup, an honour that was given to me to present to the winning team. And I was in a beautiful Carla Zampati jacket, which was almost the colour of the AFLW. That was just a coincidence, by the way. And as I was going out and the siren went, the two teams came over to me. All the girls were crying. And I thought, they're crying because they've won. Yes, they were. They were crying because they wanted to thank me for giving them an opportunity to fulfil the dreams that they've had for so long. I said, don't thank me. You've created history. That was the first national grand final of the women's football, and I was the first ambassador to hand over that cup. And by the time they'd embraced me, thank you. Thank you very much. By the time they'd embraced me, my jacket was wrecked with perspiration, and it was just... But then the Gatorade came out. Not with my hair, you can't do that. And I had to get on a plane in an hour's time. Just imagine what I would have looked like. Social media with Gatorade head and my jacket. I had no other clothes to change into. So that's a moment in time I'll never forget, as was the grand final this year. So instead of exporting our best female players now to other codes and sports who have traditionally, as far as I'm concerned, and more importantly, remunerated their participants, we're attracting a whole range of sporting people to our great game. So if you talk about transforming people's lives through sport, these girls are prime examples of what a great impact an active team-based sport like Aussie Rules can achieve. And quite frankly, I don't mind what sport men and women play, as long as they're playing and doing active team-based sport. I remember when I was a child, I grew up in one of the toughest, roughest areas. My best friend was raped and murdered. And my father directed me into sport. Yes, he knew everything, my father, but he was right on that one. It kept me off the street. It kept me on the straight and narrow, and it kept me from being a juvenile delinquent. I think some people still think I'm a juvenile delinquent, but it really, the focus on sport kept me focused on something that was so important to me, and it kept me fit and very healthy. So interest in the game is growing exponentially, not just the traditional AFL states, but right across this great land. Grassroots football is so important for the cohesion of our community, and the rise in the number of young women playing our great game has been a joy for me to watch. Figures released late last year by the AFL, just for Victoria alone, there's about 130,000 young women playing our game, about 1,300 teams. But nationally, we're nudging nearly 600,000 young women. Who would have thought that those years ago, a few years ago? So the popularity of the game with young women is quite amazing. This is leading to problems right across Australia in simply accommodating teams. There are now concerns there are not enough grounds to cope with the massive expansion of women's participation in Aussie Rules. It's a great dilemma for one to have, which I never thought would happen all those years ago when I was playing football. And I know I played a small part in making this happen. I know that very soon we'll have our own elite female competition that will rival the men's, even though I have said to Gilla McLaughlin I think the men should be the curtain raiser and the women should be the main game, but give me another 10 years on that one. That didn't go down too well. But anyhow, I did try for the girls, but it didn't work. So, I mean, we'll certainly be rivaling the men in terms of teams, depth of talent, and as time goes on, reward for effort through the payment of salaries at a higher level once due broadcast deals are reached and corporate support continues to surge. Catholic schools and community organisations have always had a strong emphasis on playing sport for cohesion and social purposes, but encouraging young men and women to play sport is also important for their physical and mental health. It also makes a contribution to help prevent type 2 diabetes, heart disease and other preventable diseases. Playing team sport is a great way to keep fit, active and make friends who have a similar outlook on life. I'm just so delighted by the stories and feedback that I receive from young girls and their parents about how excited they are to be involved in our wonderful game. But of course, women have always been involved as volunteers in the local football clubs, as team manager, running out the water bottles, paying the club bills, and even moonlighting as a team psychologist. I'm sure there's probably many of you in the room here tonight who assist at your own local football club where your kids or grandkids play. The spirit of volunteerism runs through the veins of most Australian rules football clubs, as it does for many other sporting codes in our great country. So in this modern 21st century Australia, let us celebrate the achievements of the AFLW. We've come a long way, but still a lot more to be done. But finally, women now have a league of their own. And just on one final note, I would like to thank everyone in this room for showing your support for the Archbishop and the important work the diocese does. Like all of you, I support a range of charitable causes with my time and resources. When I was growing up, it seemed a given that people were involved in assisting their communities by being involved in a service club, church organisation or philanthropic endeavour. Over the years, society has changed and become much more self-focused and self-absorbed, which meant we are not able to give the necessary help and assistance to those who fall by the wayside, as perhaps we once did. But your attendance in such numbers tonight has restored my faith in humanity, and I'd like to congratulate you all for supporting the 21st Annual Archbishop's Dinner. I mentioned my daughter, who rang me a couple of weeks before she died, and she said to me, "Mum, have you written that book?" Because she'd already asked me when she was at university and I just ignored it. She said, "Mum, people would like to hear the story of your life." So I guess you could say that was my daughter's last wish, and I never wanted to do it. So it took me many, many years to find the courage to have that book written. So it is the story of my life, and I've had to, it was very difficult. It took me a long time, it took me 2 years to put it on paper, but I think you'll find it an interesting read. I didn't write it to make money. Any money that comes to me, it goes to medical research, because I know that's what my daughter would have wanted. So I promised my daughter that one day I would write that book, but it took me a long time to find the courage. I know that if Danielle was sitting in the room here tonight and talking about my journey and my passion for life and for women in sport and business and finding a cure for type 1 and many other diseases, I know she'd be very proud of me. So my parting words to you are to work together, to make a difference in what you do in helping others less fortunate than yourself. God bless you all, and take a minute to thank the Lord for our good fortune in living in the best city, Victoria, and as far as I'm concerned, the greatest country on earth, Australia. Dio vi benedicta.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think tonight we've been very privileged to hear from a remarkable human being. Again, put your hands together for Susan. I'd like to now call to the stage Justice Richard Tracy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me very great pleasure to pass a vote of thanks to our guest speaker. I do it not least because many years ago I was a football umpire, and I have some empathy with her family, father and brother, who obviously decided that playing with her would be a bit too rough and tough, and it was a lot safer to be an umpire. A decision I'd made very early on after a few knocks on the field. If we're looking for a theme for this evening, I think it can fairly be described as selfless service. Selfless service by the Knights of the Southern Cross, who do so much work to raise funds to support priests and religious and other church causes. Done as volunteers, and as we've heard tonight this function has grown until it's celebrating its 21st birthday. Selfless service by the bishops, priests and deacons who are with us tonight, the work they devote to their parishes, to the seminary, to the church, and their willingness of great self-sacrifice to the point that we have learned this week that they are prepared to go to jail rather than breach the seal of the confessional. And we're very grateful to them for that. And there are many other works of charity in the course of performing their duties. And then we come to our guest speaker. She's taken us on a long life journey, a journey with many ups and downs, marred by great tragedy. But it hasn't dampened her spirit. Rather, it has made her more committed than ever to such worthwhile community functions as research into diabetes, the saving of the Footscray Football Club when it was in its darkest hours 20 or 30 years ago, and how good it is to know that she, as a result of that, has lived to see them win the premiership. It's not unnotable that at the moment I think they're sitting 7th on the ladder again, as they were in 2016. But there have also been the funds that have been devoted to medical research in broader areas. The AFLW that wasn't going to happen but now is very much up and running, not least because of the charitable and other support given it by Susan Alberti. On behalf of us all, may I extend to her our gratitude for speaking this evening and for the wonderful message that she's conveyed to us all. It's my great pleasure to be able, on behalf of the organisers of tonight's dinner, to present to her a plaque to thank her for her attendance and speech this evening.
Thank you.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, please keep the applause going. Thank you, Richard, and of course to our guest speaker, the fabulous night tonight. Can I remind you that the silent auction will close in 5